are you? Yeah, you too. Good.
You call me or
Welcome, everyone. My name is Carrie Pattison, and I'm honored to be the pastor of the Woodstock Reformed Church. And I also have the joy of working at the Golden Notebook bookstore. So I feel like I have the best jobs in town, and they're right across the street from each other. And this afternoon, as I was kind of perusing through Jeffrey's book and thinking about these concepts of wonder and curiosity and bewilderment and hope and connection and something I'm forgetting. Admiration. That's perfect. We are so grateful you're here. We admire the work you're doing. And there is an ancient version of the Hebrew word to speak that generates from a term meaning to give a jewel. So I am believing that today, whatever it is that we are going to receive from Jeffrey is going to be many, many jewels that you can take with you. And we're so glad you're here. And I'd like to introduce my colleague and the co-owner of the Golden Notebook Bookstore, James Conrad, to do further introduction. Thank you for being here.
Silence yourself. She just told me to remind you that I'm going to forget if I didn't say it right now. Hello, welcome. I thank you, Carrie. Carrie's been a great addition to our store, and we're happy to have her. Come on Fridays and Saturdays and visit her there. I want to give a shout out to Jackie Callahan, who's up in the back. Probably saw her when we were talking, my co-owner with me. We're very excited to be here with you. I wanted to just say that I'm going to be very brief because I'm going to leave the public speaking for the experts, which are Blair and Jeffrey Davis. And I just wanted to say that these are two very old friends of mine in Woodstock. I actually realized that I first met Jeffrey in Woodstock about 20 years ago next year. And then I became friends with Blair kind of shortly after that, so it's been a while. I'm going to leave Jeffrey's introductions for Blair, but I just wanted to introduce Blair Glaser to say that she's been around the Woodstock area for a long time. We've lost her now to the West Coast. Well, she'll be back as much as she can, I believe. She had a wonderful practice here in town. She's worked at many schools and organizations, the Omega Institute being one locally that you all know and love. She wears many hats in her professions, working in leadership and working in a lot of other fields. She's also an amazing writer, and I just wanted to say, if you don't follow her on social media, you should go to blairglaser.com, and she has a lot of, I know she's working on a book, but she has a lot of publications online and in print, and you should follow them and read them, they're terrific. So I'm going to hand this over to Blair right now, and thank you all for coming, and we're selling books afterwards, and I think I got it all. Okay. Great.
Hi everybody, it's such an honor to be back in Woodstock. It's so nice to see some familiar and some new faces. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you my very good friend, sometime mentor, always colleague, Jeffrey Davis. Jeffrey, I first met him when he was a yoga teacher in Woodstock, and over the years we got to know each other through a program that he pioneered called HV Create, Hudson Valley Creatives. And through that program I got introduced to his work, his thoughts about wonder, his contribution to storytelling in branding, and his leadership work in supporting people in becoming the best versions of themselves and bringing the best of their talents to the marketplace. It's been a wonderful journey to grow in friendship with you. And I'm so excited that I get to be here to launch his book, Tracking Wonder, which I feel is the perfect culmination of his thought leadership over the years, and to bestow upon you the gift of wonder that I experience his book to be, and in my life and in the way that I'm moving in the world, having been introduced to his concepts. So.
Wow, thank you. And thank you everyone for being here. I will just let you lead the way. Thank you so much for that introduction. It's an honor.
Absolutely. Since this is his book launch, I do think that the best way to begin to introduce you to him, if you don't know him and his work, is by having him read a portion of the very beginning of the book, which I think will share with you a little bit into his world and how some of these concepts were born through his own experience.
Thank you. This comes at the very beginning of chapter 1, which is titled Flames, and I think it will set up some things for our conversation today. I peeled a paperback edition of Psychology's founding figure, William James's essays on psychology, from the burnt, blackened wall of my study. The book, the one that included the early American psychologist's prescient observations on different kinds of focus, on the need for relaxation, and on different states of consciousness, had been compressed into the wall from the pressurized fountain of the firefighters' hoses. I ripped from my singed walnut desk a copy of the Buddhist psychologist Mark Epstein's book, Going to Pieces Without Falling Apart, as I tried to hold it together. In a bit of a stupor, I scanned the room and took in the soaked books strewn on the hardwoods, a heap of ash where my modest meditation table had been, and dim rays of sunlight coming in through the holes the firefighters had knocked in the walls so the flames could escape. It hadn't been an easy summer. My wife, Hillary, and I were newly married. I just made the mistake of seeing Hillary, so I just got emotional there for a minute. But a year before our wedding, we bought an 1850 farmhouse in New York's Hudson Valley. The house of great strength, we called it. I, the wide-eyed dreamer, writer, and entrepreneur, had my sunny study that looked through a wide window onto my version of Walden Pond. Hillary, the acupuncturist, professor of Chinese medicine, and business owner, relished her home office and sunny garden. We were ready at last to build our lives, our mutual businesses, and maybe someday a family. My parents divorced when I was 13, and as a teenager growing up with my bachelor father, I was on my own a lot, shopping for my own groceries, caring for the house, doing the laundry, getting to school. Hillary and I each had had fleeting first marriages, and since we both savored prolonged solitude and quiet, neither of us was certain if we'd ever find a partner we could live with for several years. This was the first stable relationship and the first stable home we both had ever had. The morning that we moved in, we sat out back, gazing upon the large pond fed by a mountain stream. I said, I think I could die here. We felt at home. But that first summer, Hillary had 2 miscarriages. Our plans for children postponed. We weren't sure if we'd ever have the family we both deeply wanted. While I was leading retreat not far from where we lived, I got what I thought was a spider bite. It grew black and red, and the night I came home, I had fevers and cold sweats all night. The doctor saw a bullseye around the bite and quickly made the diagnosis of Lyme disease. The brutal antibiotics used to treat it slammed me on my back, leaving me exhausted and brain fogged. Then, on a July afternoon, Hillary and I had set out for a self-guided local farm tour in the hamlet where we live. By the time we left the first farm, an eerie purple-colored storm had rolled in without warning. We pulled over and gawked at the lightning bolts that laddered from the sky to the earth. By the time the downpour sent us back home, 4 red trucks worth of firefighters were pointing hoses toward our farmhouse. Lightning, the fire investigator later explained, had likely hit a black walnut tree that stands outside my study. The voltage apparently traveled under my floor, found a faulty electric wire that extends to the attic above my study, and fused the wire. Flames roared through the room, burning 20 years of paper archives, destroying 300 volumes of books, and melting my laptop that contained all the files of a new endeavor. This fire came way before the digital cloud, and I would never recover most of my work. Firefighters arrived, waterlogging what remained. After the smoke subsided, we were out of our home for nearly a year and a half. And within 10 months, bitten by another tick, I was confirmed to have Lyme disease again. Getting through the day with all my symptoms felt like trying to drive 70 miles per hour in second gear. You likely have had your own version of house fires and tick bites, perhaps much more dire than this account. And if you have, I'm truly sorry. We each construct a home of beliefs and values, relationships and work that makes up our reality. When the one you've made burns, how do you respond? How do you navigate these times when you're just starting a new dream or in the middle of one? Is the highest aim merely to get through the day as unscathed as possible? If you view life as a quest, as I do, then you acknowledge that challenges are part and parcel of what to expect on the path you've chosen. But woe and woe when those challenges are relentless, accumulative, and seemingly personal. When I returned to our property to assess the damage, the sky showed through holes knocked out of the study's walls and ceiling. I'm not one to give in easily to self-pity, but I really did start to question how it could be that once we had finally launched our dream, It could all vaporize in a flash of lightning. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't find the tears. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't direct the rage. Instead, I calmly gathered William James and Mark Epstein, Bell Hooks and Henry David Thoreau, and a score of poets, trying to build a familiar alliance of soul, music, and inner fire. I knew I had to muster every ounce of soldierly grit to persist, but I stood before that charred wall dizzy with both a load of anger and a shred of acceptance about what was to come next. I can only describe this mixed state as confusion, if not vertigo. I felt an uncomfortable urge to shut down. Yet amid the black rubble, a small fluttering of yellow appeared, a monarch butterfly, likely showing up in an uncanny color morph, had slipped in and landed on a smoked-out shelf. Its fuzzy torso was the size of a baby's finger. It carried 2 enormous paragliding wings, etched like stained glass panels. They waved back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, like 2 palms pulsing in prayer. For a moment, the pieces I was fiercely holding together inside me dissolved. For a moment, a strange sense of opening swept through me, wide and free. For a moment, among the ruins of our simple dreams, there fluttered a small winged hope. Feeling that beauty and recognition, fleeting as it was, I knew ultimately we would be okay. Maybe someday even better.
I love that opening chapter so much because it illustrates so well what he goes on to share about how in moments when we are in crisis, sometimes moments when we're even in a creative thrust, wonder can come in, and even though it may be fleeting, its effects are lasting. And I'd like to invite Jeffrey to define what he means by wonder, how it relates to creativity, and also tracking wonder. But before we do that, I'd like to find out a little bit about who is in the audience today. And so I'm going to invite you to raise your hand if you identify as a business professional. Entrepreneur, you can raise your hand again. Service professional. Okay. Creative, do you identify as a creative? More hands. Do you identify as a writer? This is Woodstock. Lastly, do you identify as being somebody who considers themselves on an evolutionary path? So we have a rich variety of threads of people for whom wonder can really impact their lives and their work. And given that, I'd love to ask you to explain creativity, wonder, and what you mean by tracking wonder.
Okay, thank you. Let's start with creativity. Because a through line of the book is the ways in which certain facets of wonder can help us approach life more creatively, a little less reactively. So I define creativity very broadly as the innate capacity to generate and move on both novel and useful ideas. That could be, how do I get my child to sleep tonight? It could be, how do I advance this crazy idea to start a CBD farm, right? So it can be everyday challenges that arise or larger endeavors, complex endeavors that arise. That is really creativity, and I would also define it as our biological urge to generate things that are new and useful and beautiful. I think it is part of our human mammalian wiring. So wonder, it took me a long time to come to a definition of wonder that feels accessible to so many people. So I'll just define it this way as a starting place. Wonder is a heightened state of awareness brought about by something unexpected that delights us, disorients us, or both. It could be a turkey walking through the streets of Boston, but it also could be, if you take stock of where perhaps you've been for the past 2 years, when your sense of what's real and true gets turned inside and out or upside down, the globe seems to tilt a little sideways, that's potentially wondrous as well, as we'll explore, that disorientation. So what's remarkable about these experiences of wonder is I've been on this trail for over 15 years, researching, experimenting, applying in different fields. What's remarkable is the moments are fleeting, but they have potentially lingering, long-lasting effects. They pause the fight or flight response in us when we're approached by surprise. We don't flee from the surprise, we don't run toward the surprise and try to fight it and dispel it. Instead, for a moment, we're held in a moment of pause. There's emotions like love draw us toward the stimulus. Emotions like fear repel us. Wonder pauses us and holds us in a space of appreciation and receptivity and potential acceptance. For a fleeting moment, these moments of wonder can dissolve our biased perceptions so we can see again what is real and true, what is beautiful and what is possible. That could be our view of ourselves. That could be our view of each other. It could be our view of this ordinary physical world right around us in any moment. It could be our view of reality. It could be some idea we have in our minds. Tracking is a way of not trying to pinpoint it down. So this has been a challenge for me to research wonder and not hold it down. Got you all figured out. So that's in part why I think it took me so long to write this book, because I kept checking my own assumptions and making sure I was living certain practices and corroborating them. So tracking involves, like many of our faculties, beyond the 5% of our analytical, rational consciousness. It does require a somatic intelligence. It requires imagination. It requires awareness of awareness in any given moments as well. And it requires the willingness that if wonder doesn't track you, that you're willing to track it. And that's what I hope the book helps us all do. It gives us a shared language of these emotions of possibility.
Thank you. Jeffrey has divided wonder into 6 facets, but before we delve into each of them, he shares that there is a part of us that can aid us in tracking wonder, and he calls it the young genius. And I'm going to turn it over to him to explain it and to maybe get you to reflect on your young genius.
So let me say from the outset, wonder is not kid stuff. Wonder is radical grown-up stuff. If anything, I hope you come away today wondering more about wonder. And also being willing to challenge some of your own assumptions about things, including wonder. However, there is a really important dimension of us tracking wonder, which, yes, I call your young genius. It has 2 inspirations, one in art and one in philosophy, now corroborated by some studies in science. So the inspiration in art comes from Charles Baudelaire, French poet and art critic in 1850s and late part of the 19th century in Paris. And He was writing an essay about the modern painter. He used that term before, we commonly would talk about modern art. And he's specifically focusing on this one artist, Constantine Guise, who had started drawing and sketching and painting when he was about 60, mostly self-taught. And some of his work was being shown. And kind of bottom line that really stuck with me for a long time is that Baudelaire's looking at his work and he says, genius is the capacity to retrieve childhood at will. Genius is the capacity to retrieve childhood at will. And I know we have some artists and amazing installation sculptors and artists in this room. And if you were to scan some of the most notable artists and innovators in different fields in the past 100 years, you could probably say, oh yeah, they retrieved some aspect of their childhood at will. So that really stuck with me. The inspiration in philosophy, because I was very deeply immersed in psychology, philosophy, starting in college, comes in part from Greek philosophy, from Aristotle, his teacher Plato, his teacher Socrates. And they all describe the sense that we're each born with this force of character. One psychologist calls it sort of like our soul's code beyond nature or nurture. That we're each born with, that if I frame it as if we remember it and recognize it, it will awaken us to our best work and our best self in the world if we awaken to it. It's this force of character we're each born with. The trick is, according to the Greeks, we're born forgetting. We travel sort of through the river Lethe, so to speak, and we're born forgetting it. And there are occasional moments, perhaps in our childhood, and perhaps in moments when people might see something in us that we can't quite see in ourselves, that draws it out. And sometimes in moments when you feel so free and alive as a grown-up, engaged in some activities, that you remember. It's as if a veil lifts and you remember your genius. You have a moment of aletheia, unforgetting. So genius then is, for you, your young genius, I think, why don't I just take you through an exercise? Okay. I'm gonna have you stand up. When I was growing up in church, my favorite time was like standing up. It's like, oh my God. We're not gonna sing, but I think standing actually will help your active imagination. We'll just kind of shift the energy here as well. So just stand in a way that you feel comfortable and centered and anchored. And I'm going to invite you in a moment to perhaps go back to a time when you were 7 or 8, 9 or 10. And if that's not accessible for whatever reasons, you can go later. That's okay too. Okay? So I do encourage you either to close your eyes or to look up or to look down and anchor your eyes away from me. And just feel centered here in this space, in this body. And invite your memory back to a time when you were 7 or 8, 9 or 10 years old, when you felt free and alive to express yourself uniquely, without regard for reward or recognition. You may recall being outside or inside, with others or alone. You may just need to capture little shards of memory, images. What are you doing? Where? And how are you being most uniquely you? See that young genius, regardless of whether or not others at the time saw it. And perhaps try to find 3 adjectives to describe your young genius. 3 adjectives that with compassion you would use to describe that genius. And let those words really sink in. Feel them alive and present right now.
All right, you can sit back down.
Thank you.
So, what I'm going to invite you to do is turn to somebody to your side, behind you, and share those words. Share the words. And if you want to share anything else about that,
We're going to demonstrate. All right? Here's one way to do it. It's actually even to just start with I am blank, blank, and blank. All right? The idea too is to really see it in yourself and let it be seen by somebody else as well. And so you also really see it in the other. Let it be recognized. Okay, so I'll go first. Okay. I am imaginative, caring, and peaceful.
I am laughing, confident, and daring.
Yep. Okay, we'll give you some time. Yeah.
You can go ahead.
What are you?
I have a Mozart mind.
You can start to round that up, and if you have more to say, find that person after we close and share more. I love when this happens. I'd love to share something with you, which is that this is not my first time doing the Young Genius exercise. And normally I get taken back to a time when I was very theatrical. And I loved to sing and get on stage and belt my heart out. I had no self-consciousness. That's normally what comes up. But today, being in church, I remembered laughing in church and how delicious it was to try to stop it, and then it would make it come out more, and how much fun that was. And all of a sudden, in my Young Genius exercise today, I was just laughing a lot, which is so delightful. It's also important just to distinguish here how different the Young Genius is from the work that some of you may have done or continue to do in therapy, where there's more focus on the woundedness of your youth. That's important work, it's valuable work. This is something very different. Anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And it can make us very vulnerable. And so if you're feeling a wave of emotion, just acknowledge that. Because it comes up. And it's just meaningful. I would say sometimes that's the only story we need to ascribe to it in the moment is this is meaningful. This is meaningful, whatever is being awakened here. And I would encourage you to continue having a conversation about your young geniuses with somebody that you trust. It is powerful work. I've worked with a variety of people non-binary and men and women. And we do have wounds from our childhood regardless of circumstances. And so, I think of Mary Oliver, who in her last years wrote about some of her trauma as a child for the first time. And yet she also says she maintained an abiding connection, she doesn't use the word genius, but it's very close, to that girl who found sanctuary in words and woods. Right? And Oprah and Maya Angelou and a slew of others maintained an abiding connection or reclaimed that part of themselves. So I often say genius is the capacity to reclaim our childhood at will. Yeah, thank you
Nice.
for that.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
Jeffrey talks about using the young genius in tracking wonder. And he's broken down wonder into 6 facets. We're going to take you through all 6. First, I just wanted to ask a little bit about why you've broken it down into 6 facets. You do share it in the book, why you've chosen that word.
Yeah, so again, like I said, for a long time, I had to keep checking my own assumptions on wonder. I wrote a really bad book proposal in 2004 on like everything I thought I already knew about wonder. And I'm so glad nobody ever saw that. I'm glad it went up in flames. But and then I gave myself the challenge. I'm going to cite 250 citations from all different fields just to rattle my own cage. And that was good. And then I started this sort of living laboratory after what I just read to you from the book. The living laboratory was twofold. It was my own life, and it was with my community and my clientele, what's working for them, and then corroborating with some of the emerging science of wonder. Understand in 2004, 2005, there's very little science on wonder directly, so I went to lots of other sources. Now I'm happy to say, and I don't mean this diminishing at all, scientists are catching up, like they're corroborating a lot of what we've been on the trail of. So why facets? Again, I didn't want to pinpoint wonder down, but wonder has many sides and dimensions, like a multifaceted gem. Carrie referenced the jewel, it was so perfect, but wonder is like this multifaceted gem that has different sides. And what I wanted to give us is a shared language. You know how in therapy sometimes a therapist can help you name certain emotions you're feeling. You're like, oh, that's disappointment. Oh, that's, guilt, and so forth. And in Buddhism, there are lots of names for different states of consciousness so you can navigate that inner world. I'm hoping this book gives you a language, a shared language of possibility where like, oh, that's what that is. And I want to foster more of that. I want to up my wonder ratio. So yeah, that's why facets.
Great, thank you. The first facet that he writes about in the book is called openness. And I'd like you to share a little bit about what that is and maybe give us a taste of openness now.
Yeah, okay. Openness is it's like a radical, wide-eyed wonder. It is where I talk about fostering more of an intelligent naivete. So the work of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who died recently at 89, his research in psychology gave us the language of flow, starting in 1995. And in his follow-up work on creativity, he describes creative personalities as often being in extremes and paradoxes. And one of those paradoxes is that creative people can be extremely smart and extremely naive. And in this culture, so often we grow up trying really hard to hide our naivete and to appear the expert or the one who knows, the smartest one in the room. And that's kind of what we think we need to survive. We need a certain degree of competency and excellence in our work, but there's a real advantage to fostering more of an intelligent naivete, especially when you're starting off on something that seems kind of risky, like starting like a whole business endeavor called Tracking Wonder. And I'll remember years ago, my father-in-law, my new father-in-law, he's like, only you can make a living tracking wonder. And he meant it in a loving way, actually. That can be risky, and I know you know what I'm talking about. You have an idea, it seems kind of risky, or you want to make a big change in your life, it sounds risky. And other people may be like the naysayers around you, or you have what I call downer patterns, very normal patterns of the mind that are telling you something about yourself, or the idea, or your situation. It's kind of a story-making part of the mind, default patterns that only have part of the truth. So openness is maintaining a wide openness to possibility in the face of those potential challenges and naysayers. So something you could do just right now is start with the somatic intelligence, the physiological reality of open and closed states. So for instance, take stock right now of how you feel in your temples. You probably feel a little closed, in part because you're really trying to focus on what I'm saying. You're taking in information. So focus is a good closed state. But what does openness feel like in the mind? What does openness feel like in the body? And somebody just call out an answer to this question. What geographical spaces or physical spaces foster a sense of openness in you? Somebody just raise their hand and call out. Yes?
The sky.
The sky.
Light shining through stained glass.
Light shining through stained glass. Yes. Ocean. Okay. These horizons, often, I have a horizon spot. I went out with my younger daughter today to my horizon spot. This is a way I keep fostering openness in my whole self as I go out to open spaces. And the sky is always accessible. Even when it's cloudy, it's always accessible. And there's now great benefits to literally looking up. So those are just a couple of things you can do, is like check when you're feeling closed in a not so optimal way, and go to some of these places. You can't go to the ocean, but even looking at images of the ocean can actually induce a similar state of openness. Yeah, so that's a good
Yeah, that was something I didn't realize until I read your book, that you could look at a picture of nature on your computer. It made me feel so much better about scrolling Instagram. I'm actually opening to wonder. This is fantastic. I think we can move on to curiosity.
Yeah.
Curiosity, he often calls a cousin of wonder, very much related, very much a part of it. You also talk about it as the rebel facet. So tell us a little bit about that.
I'm just a minute. I do want to give many props to my publisher, Sounds True, and their design of the interior of the book. So they surprised me in a couple of areas. One was, as I was talking to the associate publisher, like, what are we going to do with this Young Genius section? It was actually her idea. She was like, let's make it an unchapter. Like, it needs to stand out some way. So it's not numbered, and you'll find, I don't know, around page 87 that the book turns sideways. You're going to read this way. But one thing I am really pleased with, too, is that each facet has a particular icon. The aim there is, again, for you to experience these facets beyond just rational analysis, but metaphorically as well, because they operate at that level. So openness is called the wide sky facet. Curiosity is called the rebel facet. Let's think of the Judeo-Christian Eve and her curiosity. Got her into trouble. Expelled from the Garden of Eden. I was just sharing with Carrie, I have a big book of that's all about the theological debates in the 1500s and 1600s between wonder and curiosity, right? Idleness is the devil's playground. Too much wondering and curiosity, right? Or Pandora, right? Who opens that fateful box? Too much curiosity. So curiosity is a proactive, playful, experimental facet of wonder. So you have an idea. You're cracked open to possibility. Now, how can you learn by doing? How can you get curious about what could be some next steps you could take? Or to really crack yourself open to curiosity, live in a what-if question, a hard-to-answer what-if question. Like Karen Brody, whom I cite in the book, what if well-rested women were the ones telling the dominant stories of our culture instead of, I guess, the counter over-harried men, right? And that's led her to doing some quite revolutionary work. So you could just be like mulling over what is your what-if question, and if you think your idea is too daunting, what is a small experiment you could take to start moving it forward experimentally and not being paralyzed by perfection?
Yeah, that last part, being paralyzed by perfection, is a tough one for a lot of us to get over. Exciting to think, though, that curiosity could be a really good foil to that tendency.
Can I say something else, too, about curiosity? So you mentioned Instagram. So I've just come across some new research, just came out maybe in the past 2 months. It's correlating why there are major boosts of anxiety and depression the past 2 years with increased Zoom time and screen time, work from home. So many people have been forced to work from home. I've been doing it for a long time, but many people haven't. That's created. So there's a correlation between increased screen time and increased depression and anxiety. And part of the speculation is that when we're scrolling, getting stimulation, ping, ping, heart, email, vast amounts of dopamine are being released, and the brain doesn't have time to regroup from all of that novelty. We're very novelty fatigued as it is in the past 2 years. That's hypercuriosity. I don't have attention deficit disorder. I have what one of my clients calls attention abundance disorder. I'm curious about so much. So the reason I mention this is that curiosity coupled with wonder can ground you in staying curious with what you really care about. So connect what you're curious about with what you really care about. So yeah, rebel with the cause.
Sometimes when you get really curious about something and you're looking forward to getting all of the information, really understanding it, you hit a place where you realize you don't understand anything. Jeffrey talks about this place as a facet of wonder also. He calls it bewilderment.
This is, yeah, and so I get a lot of pushback on this, like, I don't think of bewilderment as wonder. Right. And so I am, and Kristen Noel and Bill Miles are here from Best Self Media, and they recently published part of an excerpt from the book on bewilderment as an invitation to transformation. Bewilderment as an invitation to transformation, which it is. I'm very comfortable getting lost in my mind, in the woods, on the road, in my life. I am. I've grown comfortable with confusion, existential confusion, for quite some time, and I used to think it was a character flaw. Like, why can't I just get with the program with the rest of the world and know exactly what I'm doing and what the answers are? Turns out that's kind of an advantage, especially in these days, to be comfortable with uncertainty and confusion. So just an entry point is, how many of you have seen the film The Wizard of Oz? Classic. And like, I could track almost all these facets actually through that and through a lot of other films. So, Dorothy starts off wide-eyed with wonder somewhere over the rainbow. She gets curious. Boom, she has her tornado moment. Like I just read to you my tornado moment, and then landed in Oz, and she is bewildered. She doesn't know where she is, and she kind of doesn't know who she is anymore. She's not in the familiar world. And so if that starts to come up for you, like, yeah, sometimes I still don't know who I am or who I'm becoming, that's potentially a moment of bewilderment. So instead of fighting that confusion or fleeing from that confusion, we can feel it and even fertilize it with a more creative approach. We can normalize instead of pathologize those states of confusion. This is with our identity and or with certain ideas we have. Maybe we should go to the next one just for this.
Sure, time. Well, I do find, and I love the order that you write these facets in, because I do find that when I'm bewildered, I can lean towards discouragement because I thought I had momentum, and all of a sudden I'm pausing, I'm grasping, who am I, where am I going, I thought I knew, I don't know anymore, is this really worth anything? And then it settles, and things align, and once again I feel hopeful. Jeffrey talks about hope as a facet of wonder. It's a future-oriented facet, which I find interesting. The rest have been very much in the moment. Hope has an eye towards the future.
Yeah, so I also pair them. You can think of these facets working in pairs as well. That can be accessible for you too. Openness and curiosity, probably the most common entry points. You think, oh yeah, that feels familiar. Those two facets together can really help you continue to approach life and its challenges more creatively than reactively, and up your wonder ratio that way. Bewilderment and hope together can build our resilience without hardening up during times of uncertainty or adversity and crisis, particularly with hope. So I tell a lot of stories. In the bewilderment chapter, I tell a couple of stories. One is about Tracy Fullerton, who goes on this great journey from losing her whole successful entertainment business under the dot-com crash. And so rather than fleeing or fighting and trying to find the next possible job, she goes to Walden Pond, where her family used to go for vacation. And while there, she's pausing in the space in bewilderment. She gets these questions of like, what if we created video games that aren't just shoot 'em up? What if we created video games that are kind of meditative and contemplative? What if we created a video game based on Walden? If you know Walden, like this was the seminal book for me. You're like, video game, Walden? Anyway, she stays in that question for 10 years, getting cancer and so forth, ends up creating, I will say, a great video game. That's the only video game I'll play with my daughters. It's a great video game for creative introverts, because it's very slow and meditative. So that's bewilderment. And hope, I just want to say briefly, since this is such a creative audience, music has a history here, I tell the story, well, let me pause here for a moment. The New York Times just published a beautiful article and story of Iman, just 2 days ago, Iman's life after David Bowie's death. And she came up to her upstate place, which is not far from here. And what has sustained her, I've done deep walks in the woods every day building a cairn, stone cairn, and trying to savor the sunsets that David loved so much, and wishing she could share them with him. And she gets this little inkling of an idea. Maybe I could create a fragrance. Like it just sort of comes out of nowhere. Maybe I could create a fragrance. And over the next couple of years, she ultimately creates her first fragrance called Love Memoir, which in part has a scent that David used to always wear. It comes in a container the color of many Hudson Valley sunsets. So I mention that as an example because she didn't surrender hope. She didn't surrender. She continued to do things that were physical and beautiful, and she set short-term goals to help her keep moving forward, and she paid attention to something that could be possible in the future, and she kept working with it. I'll also just say briefly, I tell the story of Nick Cave, who's maybe Australia's most renowned musician. He's incredible. He became a 9-to-5 creative in 2000 when he and his wife gave birth to a pair of sons, boys, twins. And in 2015, at 15 years old, one of his sons fell to a fatal death off a cliff. And when he's interviewed, and there's a film about him going through his grief, he describes how decentered he and Susie were, completely off-center, and very self-centered, understandably. And what got them out was first community. So, turns out we need to surround ourselves with other hopeful people. So the community was a really important piece. And gradually he said, I had to find my center again. What is my center? He said, well, for me, and maybe for all creative people, and maybe for all of us, it's a sense of wonder. And so he gradually finds a non-9-to-5 way to create. Shreds of paper, ideas, just kind of loosely, randomly, and creates a stunning album called Ghost Team. It is a gorgeous exploration of grief and wonder together. Martha Nussbaum says, a philosopher and psychologist says that grief and wonder often mingle. And so, for hope, for us, when you find yourself in that adversity, you first of all don't want to go it alone. You want to surround yourself with other hopeful people. You want to set your sights on just like, what could I do in the next 2 weeks? And how could I creatively just keep taking steps forward while not bypassing all of the things that I'm feeling?
Yeah. He calls it, I love this, Hope Horizon. Did I get that right?
A hope horizon.
A hope horizon.
Yeah.
I love that.
Again, that geographical space is important to go back to in times of adversity and crisis. So that's the rainbow facet. Hope.
When you were taught the rainbow, right? When you were talking about Nick Cave's journey, part of a central part of him coming out of that horrible wound was finding other people, and you in fact call connection a facet of longing. So
Yeah.
talk about connection as longing. I mean, as wonder. I'm
That's
sorry.
right, that's okay. Connection and admiration are the final pair, and I think these are perhaps the most important facets of wonder for our times. They are where I can get most emotional, because what always breaks my heart the most is how we treat each other and how human beings treat each other, how we get stuck in our biased boxes toward one another and grouping each other and in very polarizing ways, and we forget to see the human being right in front of us. So connection speaks to our longing to sync up with one another. It speaks to our longing to belong. It is what I call the flock facet. How many of you have ever seen Starlings in Murmuration? Right? And I heard the moments. It's just like, oh, yeah, right? It is eliciting what I think is that yearning in us human beings to sync up in some ways. It's why we go to Cirque du Soleil. It's why some of us join organized sports. Not me, but others join organized sports. And I respect it. It's like, this is a way that I'm syncing up with others. Or we do line dancing and so forth. So actually, do we have time? Can we do something? Okay.
We're going to do line dancing?
We're not going to do line dancing. So I talk in the book, one of my clients, Amelia Terrapin, who founded Mobius Method in Washington, D.C., she's done a lot in movement and studying nature. she works with organizations and movement, and she introduced me to this idea of a flock dance. Now, my family knows what a flock dance is because, especially during the pandemic, we did flock dances. So, here's the idea. Blair doesn't know I'm doing this. I'm going to start. We're going to stand up in a moment. I'm going to start. I'll put on a song, one of my favorite songs, and I will start some motions like this. Like everybody just raise your maybe your left hand, and you're going to mirror it back. Okay. Then I may turn it over to Blair, and then we're going to follow Blair. Right. If we were like my family, like we all face who's ever the leader of the flock. Right. Okay. Are you open?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Really
Okay.
Maybe you could do it without music.
Oh, I can?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you just start
Okay, just
moving.
I'll turn it off.
We'll-
Okay.
we'll go with you.
Okay, good. That's weird. All right, hold on. Bear with me. Here's good enough.
Yeah. I love the face. See if you can make the face he's making. Are we doing each person? Who do I pass
You can pass it to me for now,
I'm
or
gonna
you can pass it to Aaron.
I'll pass
And
it
then
to
Aaron,
and then
come
you
up here.
pass it back.
Come up here, Aaron. You can pass it to me. All right, thank you.
I had no idea we were going back to my drama therapy days. That was fun. That was
It's a
fun.
different way to be together too, right?
Yeah.
So I did those with groups throughout the pandemic. We've done them on Zoom before. It's a different way to be together. And really connection, I go through other exercises. I talk about part of the mind called the adaptive unconscious that naturally sizes up things and categorizes and boxes things and people. It helps us survive. You might have come in to this space, friend, foe, who can I sit next to, right? All this stuff going on unconsciously. But part of the work of tracking wonder and connection is to keep busting our bias boxes. When we meet a stranger or when we're with people we've known for a really long time to bust our bias boxes. So, yeah, really important work.
Thank you. We're just going to touch on admiration since we spent some really fun time in connection. Admiration is wonder. As I was reading your words, I was thinking about this wondrous experience that I have inside of me when sometimes I realize I get to live with this wonderful human being, Aaron. I just feel like he's right there. I feel it with my dog. Do you guys have cats or dogs? Sometimes you're just in awe and wonder at how amazing this person is. And then when you tell them, which we do to our animals in songs that we make up and all kinds of petting, something gets generated, and you document it so well in the book. since this event is titled The Gift of Wonder, I want to jump off of admiration into what it means to gift people with wonder. Admiration certainly is one easy way to do it. And he distinguishes it really well from praise. It's not empty praise, it's not, you're so great. It really comes from that deep acknowledgement of seeing another and honoring the wonder of their being.
I love that. Yes, thank you. And beautiful examples. David Bowie does make a cameo because I admired him so much growing up. Admiration I define as like a surprising love towards someone whose excellence potentially may uplift the best in you, right? And it could be their character, maybe who they are, how they are. It could be their craft, the way they do something. This is different from envy, although it can be a fine line. I have ways to change envy into admiration based on lots of experience. How many of you envy people sometimes, right? So, yeah. I want to tell one quick story, if that's okay. Yeah. Lucille Clifton, amazing poet. In the 60s, I think she had 6 children, all under the age of 7 at one point in her life, raising that many children, I think, is that right? And she became a really well-known poet and very influential, still influential. I keep reading from this filmmaker, this artist, this writer talking about Lucille Clifton's legacy of influence on them. She was a black poet, and despite all of her accolades, she goes to Harvard to visit her husband where he was teaching, and she sees on campus all of these svelte 18, 19-year-olds, and all this is going on in her mind. And she goes back to the room where she's staying, and she writes a poem called What the Mirror Said. What the Mirror Said. The root of admiration is wonder, M-I-R-A. It's wonder. It's where we get the word mirror. And it starts with, listen, you a wonder. You a city of a woman. She's a big body. You're a city of a woman. So it closes with, man with his hands on you, he need a map to get around. So I mentioned that because sometimes we need to turn the mirror on ourselves too in terms of self-admiration, which is part of the work of genius. So is there something you wanted to do with that, or?
Actually, I'm thinking this.
Yeah.
That we give you guys some time to ask Jeff some questions you have about wonder. I'm going to give you a little parameter to your questions in a minute. But what I would love is that at 25 after, this event goes until 4:30. At 25 after, I'm going to pause to give Jeffrey a chance to close out by gifting us with wonder by reading from the end of his book and the stances of wonder. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's what I'd like. I'd love to, please ask questions, and because we're short on time, if you can think about your question and what you would like to have answered before you ask it, that would help a lot. I know it's not always so easy, but if you can, that'd be great.
You're going to be passing the microphone in Oprah style?
I'm happy to pass the mic. Okay. I can do that. Anybody, questions for Jeff? Thoughts, reflections, things that came up as you sat here in this event?
Thank you for this. But since you brought it up at the end, this concept of envy versus admiration, envy being, at least in my judgment, a very negative energy force, and admiration being a positive energy force, but they're so closely related. How do you flip it?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I have to say, I'm proud of that chapter because it really contributes a lot in really helping us understand admiration. And there's lots of science and stories interwoven. I distinguish admiration from adulation and blind adulation as well, right? Blind adulation is where you just sort of like surrender yourself to the other. That's not admiration. Envy, yeah, so it turns out there's a benevolent, good envy, and a malevolent envy. And certainly we know what the malevolent is. But there are some studies that actually show that a little bit of envy, good envy, can actually motivate us to excel, right? Can motivate us to maybe show up better. Not in competition to who we're envious, or it's like brings out something in us. So, to your question, I'm going to talk about name the that. That's the practice, key practice. Name the that. So the story I tell is there's a psychologist friend of mine I've known since 2010 through Psychology Today, and he's father to 3 daughters. I'm father to 2 daughters. He's really buff. I am not. He loves to show off his biceps, and he raises his girls. He's always, since they were young, shown photographs of him with his girls, which I admire. They're like eating tall stacks of pancakes, and one of them's having pilot lessons, the other one's jumping off, cliffs into the water and so forth. And I remember feeling tinges of envy. And I said, I want to be a father like that. Now, if I just stopped there, I would have steeped in envy. But then I got curious and said, well, what's the that? Because he's like Captain Fantastic to my Atticus Finch, really. And so it's like, I can't be him. I don't want to be him. But what is the that? So the that was the way he's raising his children, his girls, to be more courageous and brave and have some resilience. So that did inspire me to try to put my girls in situations that they were comfortable with and that I was comfortable with, right? Identified the that. The other practice is what psychologists Dr. Keltner and Jonathan Haidt call Tugendfreude. Schadenfreude is a German feeling that when we see somebody fall or fail, we're like, oh, good. Yeah. And everybody's like, oh, yeah. Okay, so that's Schadenfreude. Not so healthy. They coined the phrase Tugendfreude, that when you see somebody succeeding and achieving, feel joy for them. Feel appreciation for them. Acknowledge that in some ways. So when you feel a tinge of envy, see if you can be like, flip that and go like, okay, what can I really appreciate and be happy for them? Could I send them a note, even if it's tinged with a bit of envy? So I hope that's helpful. It's a really important question.
Thank you.
So, yeah. Thanks, Phil.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Hi, Jen. It's Jenna. How are you?
I just want to say Jetta's wife married Hillary and me, so I'm really happy that
She still talks about it. How wonderful and wondrous it was. Okay, so it seems to me like the facets that we spoke of are actually portals.
Mm-hmm.
And they're portals into some kind of grace. The older I've become, the more important it's been to know, because that's your security, the knowing, and the grasping, and the tightness around everything. And when you shared the story about the fire and seeing the moth, that was really about a shift in perception, because it could have been just a moth. You either didn't pay attention to it or didn't acknowledge whatever, but it didn't need to be a moment of messaging and all the other examples that you gave with Iman and so on. So it seems to me that to enter into the world of wonder, that you need a conscious decision to step into curiosity and openness. Both things that came to me when you gave us the first exercise of remembering yourself as a child. So that was of, you know, like for example, whatever, I'm not going to go into anything, but anyway, I think I got my point across. Thank you.
You did. You did, and I want to respond to a few things to this. So let's take a moment. Let your eyes roam somewhere, anywhere ordinary, and let them pause on something besides me, something ordinary. And let them just rest and pause. Over 50% of the brain is usually processing visual information, usually unconsciously. So just let your eyes soften and pause. Whatever they're gazing upon, just try not to grasp what it is. Let go of the inner language, trying to figure it out or name it. And instead just open and appreciate its shape, its hue, the play of light and shadow. Maybe its function. And see if you can muster just a few words of praise, appreciation for its beauty, its ordinary beauty, its function. Okay. That's a key practice called pause, gaze, praise. The reason I bring this up in the context of what Jetta suggested is for a moment, I would hope for some of you, how many of you just felt a shift in awareness? Felt a slight shift in awareness. Okay. So wonder is a portal of consciousness. It is a portal to consciousness. It's like a veil is lifted for a moment, and you see something different, and it's real and true and beautiful. But my approach is to make the bar a little less high. To what I want you to come away with is that wonder is pervasive. It's all here. It's already here. It's just evasive in part because of some of our wiring. The beautiful thing about being a human being is we can also trip our own wiring many times. So there's some of the intentionality, at least to be open and receptive in the moment. But I don't want to put the bar too high. that there must be, I forget what you said, like a conscious... Radical, yeah. I'm all about radical, but I want everybody just to come away with like, okay, you know, actually I can start just upping my wonder ratio today. I can just up my wonder ratio today, yeah.
I love that low bar. Makes it attainable. We actually, it looks like we have time for one quick question. So,
Yeah, we should keep these on, or?
you can take it off, no one's around you if you feel comfortable, and then you can put it back on after, sure.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you very much for this. One of the steps toward expressing genius, according to Leonardo, is the ability to undergo confusion. So we have to let our brains go into a state of complete discombobulation and non-recognition in order to let this idea come through. And I'm wondering if you have any exercises that you engage in to allow yourself. I think you just gave us an exercise.
That is one of the key entry points. Pause, gaze, praise, and also just learning. So part of tracking is becoming much more aware of your mind and your patterns of awareness and of consciousness. And so in this case, it is actually detecting confusion and actually saying, oh, this is confusion, this is okay. This is actually potentially creative, personally, spiritually creative, right? So that's part of the tracking. The other thing I would say is seek to confuse yourself. and so you detect default patterns of your habits. You can do this tomorrow morning.
Is that called curiosity?
It's curiosity blended with bewilderment, right? So wonder is always in that space between knowing and unknowing. Really unknowing what you think you know.
I want to make a plug for buying the book because he also talks about the space between the breaths when you're
Yes.
bewildered, and you should find out what that is by buying the book. And speaking of the book, before we go to the closing, both of us would like to thank the Golden Notebook for its generosity in this community, for its long-standing presence in this community. It is such a hub of hope and creativity. Is there anything else you wanted to say?
Well, and that they did weather much bewilderment the past 2 years and stayed open and stayed connected to the community and stayed safe and brave. And so just kudos, because this is the exchange of local commerce and of books and of ideas that are so, so important. So yes, and thank you to Carrie for opening this space to us. It's a very special venue to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you to you. Yeah, thank you.
So I'd love for you to read from the end of the book in closing. Send us off with your wonder wishes.
So I did ask my publisher, I said, the last chapter I wanted to be my 5 idealistic wishes, because I am a wide-eyed, pragmatic idealist. So these are my 5 wishes to the rest of you. And I'll just read from each of the 5 briefly. I'm humbled by my limitations. You and the people that you know, live with, and work with possess geniuses, talents, and skills that can be applied to reclaiming our birthright to wonder. We must do this as we pursue uncharted possibilities without wrecking our species or planet in the process. These are my 5 wishes for how we might spread wonder for the greater good. Maybe one of them calls to you. Wish 1, bring wonder home. The father who has denied his wonder and has ignored his young genius might bristle at the sight of a child embracing their own genius. Yet there are bountiful opportunities for us to foster relationships based on wonder with our loved ones. Once we remember and reclaim our own young genius, we could be more likely to generously welcome that of our partners, parents, and children. Wish 2, return wonder as the motor of learning. In this age of rampant change, wonder is the reset button that counters panic and fuels innovative curiosity. That fact has consequences for how we could design and allow for human learning in the 21st century for geniuses of all ages. To teachers, deans, managers, and anyone involved in learning, I invite you to entertain these and other questions. What if more people involved in educating others supported the art of questioning just as much as having the right answers? Wish 3, bring wonder to work. We industrious human beings spend vast hours a week working, yet our prevailing culture still diminishes workers. If the poet Khalil Gibran could be right in saying that, quote, work is love made visible, then we have a lot of work to do to bring a sense of wonder to the heart of our work, and for leaders to the heart of our workplaces. To managers, leaders, and business owners of many varieties, how could you invite more wonder into your workplace? To startup founders, funders, and legislators, how could you be in wonder in reimagining work and its institutions in ways that truly uplift the genius in everyone? Wish 4, bring wonder to the mind. So many talented psychologists, mindfulness teachers, and other spelunkers of the human psyche are on the trail of wonder. The human mind is rife with biases. But what would happen if we imbued more of our examinations of human bias with a greater appreciation for surprising moments when those biases dissolve? We can be quick to do battle with our own thinking minds and to pathologize the human mind in general. Yet the mind is what it is, complex, mysterious, and the very vehicle through which we can apprehend the beauty of the world and our own beautiful nature. Wish 5, appreciate the wonder of our home planet. If wisdom begins in wonder, I'm convinced that wonder begins in nature. I think of Rachel Carson, who upon seeing for the first time the wide open ocean horizon, shifted her major from writing to marine biology, and how that moment of her wonder forever altered the course of modern humans' understanding of our relationship to the earth. She later, in 1956, published an article in Women's Home Companion encouraging mothers to foster a sense of wonder in their children. I love that. There is an urge in us as natural as the process of autumn's cold nights, conspiring with maple leaves in October to set valleys ablaze with shades of poppies and burgundies, of golds and lemons, peaches and apricots. You could be driving through such a valley, car windows cracked so the cool air ruffles your hair and calms your mind. And as the fiery paintings pass by on either side, you might wonder aloud, my God, how can I contribute to something like that? You can't match nature's sublime beauty, of course, but you can recognize that the creative force within nature also infuses your genius to give, spread, and perpetuate wonder. As Melvin Konner reminds us, the evolution of our species and the survival of our planet requires more wonder. It's our choice. We are given this one life with its infinite potential, and each day and each week has a finite number of hours. We're here to make the most of it every day. We can wonder this world into even more beauty for all of us. So much is possible. Thanks for running.
So now you go sign, right? You
Now I go sign.
books.
I go sign books.
So you can buy books back here, and then maybe you can sign books up there. How does that sound?
That's sign books up here.
Yeah.
Buy, sign.
Yes, that
That works. Okay. Get my.
I came a little late.
Okay, that's okay. That's okay.
Hi, Bob.